Okay, so everything is a little crazy right now, a little chaotic with this North Korea situation. We've got our president tweeting all sorts of things, and he doubled down yesterday on his fire and fury threat, saying that we are locked and loaded, ready to go. What do you think about this tactic that he's using and this approach he's using when it comes to North Korea?
I don't believe you can make North Korea policy with 140-character tweets. What we need now is a tough and sober approach, and I think we could, for example, up the ante on sanctions. And the key here is really the Chinese banks. The Chinese banks make it possible for the North Koreans to move millions and millions of dollars. And I think we ought to make it clear to the Chinese we expect them to step up. And that's really doing what was done with respect to Iran. What we said in the Iran bill is you're either with the Iranians or you're with us.
Mm-hmm. So the Chinese banks then are critical in this. Do you think a preemptive strike might come to that? Do you think it's necessary?
What I believe we need to do, in addition to the sanctions, is look down the road at some talks that would again approach it differently. What I'd like to see down the road, it's obviously not going to happen in 10 minutes, and that's why I really want to focus on the sanctions and the role of the Chinese banks, is I'd like to see down the road negotiations where the North Koreans would agree to drop their missile development, and we would make it clear, the United States, Russia, and China, we would agree to drop military exercises in the region.
Mm-hmm. But how likely do you think it is that North Korea would do that?
If sanctions really bite and make it clear that the North Koreans aren't going to be able to skirt their responsibilities and the Chinese banks step up, we can take care of it that way.
How, you know things obviously that we don't know, but how concerned should, citizens of not only Guam be, but here in the U.S., especially on the West Coast, how concerned should we be about this potential threat? I mean, we had a lot of people talking about shelters from, back in the 50s, and I mean, is this a concern for us?
What I can tell you, I just finished 8 town hall meetings, all over the state. It's really the Oregon way to focus on solutions, and whether it's healthcare, whether it's foreign policy, Oregonians want serious answers and not silliness. And I think that pertains to healthcare. We've got to move in and deal with the private marketplace. I think it pertains to North Korea, and the kind of practical approach I'm talking about in terms of the immediate steps targeting the Chinese banks, I think is one of the ways you make a smart policy, and it's a little bit more than just trying to tweet something in the middle of the night.
Okay, so, but you don't think we need to go seek out a bunker just yet?
I don't speculate on those kinds of things. What I focus on is preventive policies, and what you're trying to do is use both hard power and soft power, and our hard power is unmatchable. But what I want to really do is focus on the kind of sanctions approach with the Chinese banks and looking down the road at negotiations.
Okay. Well, moving on to health care, the president has now gone after Mitch McConnell on Twitter, hinting that he maybe should step down if he's not able to repeal and replace Obamacare. What's your reaction to that?
I'm probably not the best person to talk about Republican politics and Republican leadership. You ask Congressman Wyden about that. But what I can tell you is that the Congress, on a bipartisan basis, needs to take several steps immediately in September. We need to stabilize the private insurance market, particularly what's called the individual market. These are people who don't get their care from, say, Medicare or the vets or work for a big employer. And the Trump administration has been pouring gasoline on the fires of uncertainty in this marketplace. And I believe in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans will work together to stabilize the market in the fall. And the key there is to try to make sure that the health plans get some additional help for co-payments and deductibles for people of modest incomes. Then we need to move to clamp down on escalating prescription drug prices. And I think one good way to do it is to pass my spike bill, which requires when companies are looking for big rate hikes, they would have to give a public justification for why they're doing it.
And as far as Medicaid, I know that was a huge threat to a lot of people with this last bill.
It is hugely important in rural Oregon. I was in Jefferson County yesterday, and when you talk about the fact that Medicaid picks up the cost of 2 out of 3 nursing home beds. It's hugely important for youngsters who face a variety of developmental disabilities and the like. We just cannot let that be shredded, that social safety net.
Mm-hmm. And so does it seem like there can be a resolution? We saw some from across the aisle move over and support the Democrats this last time because the bill seemed so, had so many issues.
Well, John McCain coming back from a serious brain cancer was truly inspiring. But I think one of the votes that probably didn't get a lot of press but is hugely important is that the Senate passed on a 97-2 vote a very tough sanctions measure against Russia. And we made it clear that the president could not unilaterally throw that out the window. The Senate really insisted on some tough limits on what the president could do there. And I think that's an indication that, at least in the United States Senate, Democrats and Republicans are pushing back.
When you go to these town hall meetings, do a lot of people talk about Russia? I mean, is that an issue that they want answers for as well? What
we found over the last 8-9 days and the meetings around the state is healthcare was the dominant issue on the domestic side of the budget, because for so many people, their wages, are kind of stagnant. They're not going up a lot. But things like prescription drug bills and medical costs are going up. So that was really the dominant issue on the domestic side. And then in terms of the international side, it's been North Korea and Russia. Okay.
And where are we on Russia? I know you've been a key figure in some of the Intelligence Committee hearings. Are we ever is this ever going to be resolved? It seems like a never-ending story.
Well, there are two pieces to the puzzle. What Bob Mueller does is work on the criminal side. What I'm involved with is the Senate Intelligence Committee. We are really focused on making sure that the public knows how our system, our election system and others, were hacked. And I think the key here is to follow the money. And let me give you an example of what I'll be doing in the fall. Jared Kushner came and insisted on testifying privately. Then he went and made a public statement. He said things like, well, we don't rely on the Russians for financing our businesses. The word rely is a really subjective word. I'm sure his lawyers made a lot of money on that kind of wordsmithing. He didn't say in his public statement, we have no business dealings with the Russians. He didn't say we've not worked with Russian institutions in the past. A combination of that plus the fact that you can't see the tax returns the way you have for 40 years and find out about borrowing, we've got to focus on the follow the money issues, and I'm going to insist that Jared Kushner come back before the Intelligence Committee in the fall and testify in an open session.
Okay, so you think a lot of it comes down to then semantics with some of the testimony maybe that's been given?
The lawyers have been very, very clever. There's no question that when Jared Kushner made a private statement and then he had a public statement, it would cause the average kind of listener or reader to say, well, there's nothing there. But when I looked at the words, I said, these lawyers must have earned enough to put a couple kids through college because they use subjective language, and now I consider it my job as a member of the Intelligence Committee. I don't break any oaths, I don't share any secrets, but I think my job is to ask the tough questions, and I'll do it in the fall.
And so as far as Manafort's home being raided, that's all part of Mueller's?
Well, that was Bob Mueller's judgment that they announced, but certainly the fact that Bob Mueller authorized that is a signal that he obviously believes there's some troubling matters there with respect to Manafort's finances.
Okay, so that maybe could make it to the committee.
Well, I can't talk about anything that relates to committee deliberations. Bob Mueller has a different charge than we do. Bob Mueller deals with the criminal side, and those are the experts of the 16 people that he's hired. I think 14 of them deal with things like financial crimes, which is why I focused on following the money. But he has a different charge than we do. We are not in the prosecution business. What we're in the business of doing is vigorous oversight as it relates to intelligence and making sure that the American people are told what happened to our democracy, and it's done in a way that doesn't compromise what are called sources and methods classified matters.
Okay, so expect to see more then in the fall.
Count on it.
About that. Oh, well, we will. Okay, anything else that you want to touch on? Anything that we didn't talk about?
What I can tell you is that there is unprecedented interest right now in Oregon on the matters going on in Washington, D.C., and that's why I've tried to throw open the doors of government and offer unprecedented access. We've had 62 town hall meetings this year. I had pledged that I would have an open meeting in every county in Oregon. We have 36 counties, so we visited a lot of counties several times over, and I just want Oregonians to know that we're interested in their ideas and in their suggestions. A lot of people think politics is just about big money these days. I want people to know it's about grassroots democracy. And by the way, the reason we stopped the McConnell health bill in the Senate was because Oregonians and millions of people around the country sent their calls and texts and went to rallies, and that was a real example of people power in Oregon.
All right, cool. Well, Senator Wyden, thanks so much for coming. I would shake your hand, but I don't want to make it any worse. So
Okay.
Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having
really
me.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.